Welcome back to This Is Live, the Sunday talk show, here on the Arise News channel. The 193-member states of the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization at an extraordinary session of its General Conference in Paris on Friday approved the proposal submitted by the United States to rejoin the organization. After 2 days of discussions, 132 member states voted in favor and 10 against the return of the United States to the organization, from which the U.S. has withdrawn twice, causing a negative impact on the organization's work. The U.S. will fund the equivalent of 22% of the organization's regular budget, according to a press release from UNESCO. Besides the progressive payment of the arrears, the U.S. will also make voluntary contributions to funding programs, including those supporting access to education in Africa and the memory of the Holocaust. The United States pulled out of UNESCO twice, in 1984 and 2017. In June this year, the U.S. sent a letter to the Director General of UNESCO proposing to rejoin the organization as early as July, based on a concrete financial plan which includes a commitment to repay its estimated arrears of $619 million US. Sierra Leone's President, Julius Maada Bio, has been announced winner of the country's presidential election. He was re-elected with 56.17% to serve a second term, as his main challenger, Samora Kamara, comes with 41.16% of the vote. This election results announced by the head of the Electoral Commission in Freetown, Mohamed Kenewi Kone.
I hereby certify that Bio Julius Maada having polled 1,566,932 of the valid vote cast, representing 56.17% of the total valid vote cast in the 24th June 2023 presidential election, duly elected President.
Meanwhile, candidate of the All People's Congress Party, APC, Dr. Samora Matthew Wilson Kamara, said the electoral process was flawed. According to his tweet, it is a sad day for our beloved country, and I categorically reject the outcome. End of quote. Samora Kamara, Nigeria's former ambassador to Ethiopia, Olusegun Akinsanya, joins me now to discuss these stories from the international scene. Ambassador Olusegun Akinsanya is a Nigerian diplomat and statesman who served as the Nigerian ambassador extraordinary and plenipotentiary to Ethiopia and Djibouti, as well as permanent representative to the African Union and the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa. Ambassador Akinsanya, thank you very much for joining us on This Is Live, this Sunday talk show. You're welcome.
Thank you very much, Ruben. It's always a pleasure being on the Arise News. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, sir. Well, let charity begin at home. Let's start with Sierra Leone. There were 12 candidates in that election, but apart from Julius Maada Bio, who has been declared winner, and Kamara, who came up with just about 41%, all the other candidates in that election, presidential candidates that is, got just about 3% of the votes. The result of the parliamentary elections and the local council elections have been released subsequently. And the SLPP, the Sierra Leone People's Party, the ruling party, has won majority status. But observers, European Union observers, even ECOWAS observers have said there were irregularities, maybe not substantial enough to upturn the outcome of the election. But do you think that the opposition party is right in saying that this was a kangaroo election, and that what Julius Maada Bio and the SLPP have tried to do is to prevent the situation 5 years ago where the election had to go to a runoff? What's your take?
Well, thank you very much again, Ruben, and thanks for that comprehensive intro. What I would say first is about elections in Africa. Democracy in Africa is always shrouded with problems. Problems of the fragility of states, a problem with the fact that nation building is a challenge in Africa. Yes, elections provide opportunities for changes, for people to make their choice. But we know we cannot wash off the background to the Sierra Leonean crisis, of which Nigeria, at the time, was a very prominent member in terms of brokering peace in that country. Over the years, they've had some elections that was done by some UN agencies. But as an independent state with a constitution, of course, having an elections is a very good thing in terms of building democracy. But what we have seen in Sierra Leone, there is pre-election tensions, there is election, there are problems during the elections, and then post-election, which has now come into the fore. Julius Maada Bio is one time a military leader. And of course, he won the first election, is seeking a re-election. There are tensions before the election because there are a lot of people who believe that there is need for a change. Rightly so in developing countries or in African countries. But what we found out was that the election that was run by an electoral commission, their own INEC, declared, of course, Maada Bio the winner of the election by having about 51.6%, as against Samura Kamara that had 41%. Well, like any other election in Nigeria, there will be, because of the imperfections, opposition will claim irregularities. They will claim quite a lot of things that were not right, you know. And there were these voices. But of course, the Election Commission constitutionally has the constitutional right to declare the winner, which they did. And the Maada Bio was sworn in. But one will expect that the APC, I think African People's Congress of Sierra Leone, led by Samura Kamara, will address the courts. To be able to put all the allegations just like we are seeing in Nigeria. But haven't declared Maada Bio the winner, and haven't been sworn in, for the opposition now to say that they are rejecting the elections without the force of the law, I think it's something that, probably needs to be, and that is because there's a standoff now. There is a standoff, and that is really not good for democracy. It's not good because it should lead to more tensions, and they are even asking for the sacking of the members of the INEC, their own INEC, the commission. They are asking for a rerun, but I thought that their tribunal or the Supreme Court would be the one to declare that the election needs to be rerun. But for a party coming out strong, rejecting it after swearing, rejecting after the declaration by the recognized body, it's something that could lead to chaos, which I'm sure that Sierra Leoneans don't want to have, given their experiences of the past. But as I said, democracy is work in progress in Africa and the land. But what is also worrying is that the Western observers, the monitoring team, mainly from the EU, UK and others, have also attested to the irregularities in a way. But we are yet to hear from the observation team, of AU observation team that is led by Haile Mariam Desalegn, the former Prime Minister of Ethiopia. The AU has its own formats. As you rightly said, I was PR of Nigeria in the African Union, and I went through some of these processes, gone by the charter of the UN, of the AU, and all that. AU will not give his own report until maybe after 2 months. They have already given a press conference, but we are yet to hear from the AU on the situation. But what I would just say is that that is the way the election went, and I think there has to be a meeting of the minds and retrospection to abide by the constitutional provisions of the Republic of Sierra Leone. That would be my take on that.
Okay, Ambassador Akinsanya, when we discussed this subject during the week on the morning show, the other program in which I appear, we kept tapping on parallels between the Sierra Leonean election and the 2023 general elections in Nigeria, because there seem to be some parallels in terms of saying, oh, sack the INEC chair and the entire commission, sack the Inspector General of Police, sack the Chief Justice of the Federation. In fact, we run the election, we reject the result, and all of that. What does it say about democratic consolidation in Africa, particularly in West Africa, where we have had issues in a number of countries?
Well, as I mentioned, Ruben, I mean, I've been an active participant in these processes in the EU. And when I joined the Pan-African Institution, the ISS, Institute for Security Studies, electioneering, is an issue, a main issue, because people now see rather than election being a platform for a change of government or to have a fair government. Elections has become a serious security issue. That when you talk about election in any African countries, you have to think about the security, mobilizing the police, ensuring that there's no ballot snatching. There is, that it ceases to be a mainly governance issue. Elections has now become a security issue. So that there always is a security element to say that if election is going to take place, of course, all the security apparatus of the government has to be put in place. You have to ensure that you follow certain lines. So this is why some people have said that for Africa, it's work in progress. But having said that, we also have to look at the role of the election observers, the foreign observers. Their roles in the election process. They engage in technology provision, they engage in capacity, they even provide some funding, in some cases. So, and also you have also the CSOs, the NGOs that creates a situation room and all that. And you even have the what I call the NGIs, the non-governmental individuals. So this needs to be harmonized in ensuring that what is required in election observation and monitoring is to find out the strengths and the weaknesses and advise against further government. But we have seen over the years that in some situations, some election observers take sides. I have a graphic experience of this in Ethiopia. when election was held, and the EU observer declared somebody a winner who is not the winner against Meles Zenawi. And that created a ton of problems. So that is why there's now an improvement in the fact that the Peace and Security Committee, which is the highest architecture, architecture, peace and security architecture of the AU, that is now being manned by a Nigerian who is a commissioner, Mr. Bankole Adeoye, creates a situation of African observers that is made, and in the case of Sierra Leone, they have about 20 countries that are represented. So I think the AU observer team or ECOWAS observer team need to play a more active role than foreign observers. Because foreign observers, they provide some funding, they provide some capacity building, and he that pays the piper, at times they want to dictate the tune. So I think there is need for a sort of introspection about African elections, because we have no choice but to have elections in a periodic manner. And a lot of efforts needs to be taken to that by African leaders on providing a roadmap. I mean, we saw it in Kenya. It was almost a problem in Kenya. But what now brought Ruto in was the fact that the Supreme Court or the judiciary has to come out strong within the specified time. Well, you talked about the similarities with our own system. Well, I think it's the maturity of our politicians that is coming into play, and the fact that we have had series of elections, we have our own problems, but there's still a belief in the judiciary. The tribunal is working, the political parties have not gone into the streets. Nobody has said that, oh, we reject the elections. Yes, there are irregularities, and they are now relying on the judiciary, on the Supreme Court, that will be the arbiter, that will come out, that is what the Constitution says. And I'm sure that the Constitution of Sierra Leone also provides for something like that. But I think the APC of Sierra Leone has to really toe that line if they don't want their country to again go into crisis.
Ambassador Akinsanya,
that is my take about election and democracy in Africa.
Ambassador Akinsanya, can you hear me? Looks like your talkback dropped. Okay. While he's fixing that. Can you hear me now, Ambassador Akinsanya? Hello, Ambassador Akinsanya.
Could you come again,
okay.
Please?
I was just going to ask.
Could you come again?
Yeah. Now to talk about UNESCO. The US is back after 6 years.
Yeah.
When the Trump administration accusing the UNESCO of anti-Israel bias moved out. Now the Trump administration says, we're back because China is exercising too much influence. What does this say? The Biden administration is moving back now that they say, they are challenging Chinese influence. And some countries voted against the return of the US, Nicaragua, Iran, Russia, China. What does this say about geopolitics? And what is the advantage for the rest of the world? Now that the US says it will pump in 22% of the budget and pay all its arrears.
Well, let me just first say that the return of the US into UNESCO is a victory for UNESCO, a victory for multilateralism. This has happened twice, and under Reagan, they opted out of UNESCO, and they didn't come back until almost after 20 years. And now also Trump pulled US out of UNESCO, and they are now back. I must say, I must praise the brinkmanship of the new UNESCO Secretary General, who I know personally because at the time I worked with UNESCO. I know that UNESCO has had, in spite of the core mandates, education, scientific, cultural, and they are known about all this effort. But at the time that they recognized the Palestinian question caused a lot of tensions. Because UNESCO now recognized the inalienable rights of the Palestinians, and this was, to the Americans, anti-Israel, and of course that led to the going in and come back. But coming around also with the new geopolitics of Russia and China, you know that elections, there were about 10 voted against and about 15 abstentions, which of course, those who voted against, of course, will be China. But see, under the new Secretary General of the UNESCO, there have been certain new perspectives in terms of their core functions, broadening into other areas. Yes, the accumulated funds of 616 billion that you talked about, well, I mean, with this new approach of Biden and promising that the U.S. will now come and, pay their dues. Not only that, but looking at other innovatory elements, not only because of the sudden changes, but of the increased role of UNESCO in multilateral diplomacy. They are also changing their structures, they are restructuring their administrative arrangements, they are becoming more and more engaged. They are providing some funds for education in Africa. I was part of one UNESCO's program years back, and I don't know what happened to it when I left the AU. It's called UNESCO's Culture of Peace. And taking up Hufebuanyi's edifice in Yamoussoukro, that big, foundation that it has. So now, the concept was funded by UNESCO was to have a sort of a new culture of peace, that rather than going to war and exerting a lot of energy on wars with blood, that from the scratch, let us imbibe a new culture of peace. Well, it was on, I was part of the consultancy arrangement, and we had a series of meetings, we sent our reports, but I don't know what has happened to that. But that is what UNESCO is now doing under the new DG, that is putting some funds in education in Africa, creating some new avenues, and I think that attracts the Biden administration, that UNESCO is now playing the role that it should be playing without, just reducing tensions, and also changing its own administrative structure, because you know that the U.S. is very particular about that, where you put your money, there must be some inbuilt reforms. I mean, you know what we went through with Americans on the ADB, with additional, and also with WHO. But this is very good for the UNESCO, and I'm sure that there will be effort. Biden also, Blinken, the foreign secretary, also spoke gloriously about this new coming, and I hope that the experience of the past will not repeat itself, this going in and coming back. But I think this is for real now. There is also, you talked about the geopolitical structure, there's also the new element of the artificial intelligence and drawing out rules. And they believe that China is now playing that role, dictating the rules within UNESCO, which of course, United States will think that they also have a role. So all these things are playing out. There is also the rivalry, there are the extraneous elements. But what is important is that US has now decided, because of the new perspectives, the reduction of tensions, and all other things that is happening within UNESCO under the new Secretary General or the Director General of the UNESCO, Asule. So I think it's a very good thing also for multilateralism. The veto does not happen within the UNESCO General Assembly. Otherwise, Russia and China will have vetoed that majority approval of US entry. But I think that is we are likely to see this in multilateralism. We are likely to see it in many other international organizations. This new love-hate relationship between China and the US, and of course, Russia on the other end, given the Ukrainian crisis.
Well, on
so
that note,
is the way I see it, Ruben.
On that note, sir, I would like to thank you very much for joining us on This Day Live, this Sunday talk show here on the Arise News channel. Thank you very much indeed, Ambassador Olusegun Akinsanya, former Ambassador Plenipotentiary and Extraordinary of Nigeria to Ethiopia and Djibouti, and former permanent representative of Nigeria at the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, ECA. We take another break here on This Day Live, this Sunday talk show.